Hey everybody. So today our entrepreneur of the day is Monica Wolfe from the Spirits Group, and Monica is joining us from Louisville today, right?
Yeah, Louisville, Kentucky.
Louisville, Kentucky. Um, so Monica, this class is 3 sections of undergrad entrepreneurship students, and they're largely business majors, but not all of them. And once a week we talk to somebody who has started their own whatever. So today that's you. And I usually try to just start with, tell us where you're from, where you grew up.
So I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. Moved around a good bit, but the majority of like elementary and high school was in Texas. So that's what I claim. And then the summer after I graduated high school, my family moved to Kentucky. So that was in 2003. They've been here ever since. I went away to college and came back to Kentucky about 6 years ago.
Awesome. So probably close to 50% of the students in these classes are from Texas.
Oh, really?
Yep. Texas and Arkansas have this compact. So Texas students get in-state tuition at the University of Arkansas. So we've got a big
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that.
contingent at the U of A. So a lot of these kids are also from the Dallas, Fort Worth area. So that'll be very familiar to them.
Okay, yeah, well, I graduated from Keller High School, in case anybody knows what that is.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody will have gone there for sure. So where'd you go to undergrad? Where did you decide to go to school coming out of Texas?
So most of the kids, at least in my class, went to like UT, Texas A&M, a lot, Texas Tech. I ended up going to school at Mount St. Mary's in Maryland, which was like kind of a weird choice. But I just felt like I wanted something different. I wanted to kind of just go my own way. So I was introduced to the school by my grandma. She had a priest who was a family friend who was a pastor there. But I just mostly wanted something different, and I got an academic scholarship there. And so I went, and I'd never been to Maryland before, and the school had 1,500 students, and I graduated in a class of 800. So it was very, very different. But I went, and I enjoyed it. It was good for me for what I needed at the time. I think I just needed I needed to kind of focus. So I got my business degree, Spanish minor, and then I stayed an extra year and did my MBA. So I was a graduate assistant, started courses early in the summer and was able to finish it in like a year and a half. Cool. Instead of 2 years. So kind of accelerated, but I wanted to do my MBA back to back. I knew if I started working and got out of the school mindset, I would probably have a harder time. That was just me personally. So went all the way through and got my MBA there.
Awesome. And what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up? When you were an undergrad student, what was your sort of intent?
So I wasn't sure. I always knew that I wanted to be in business. So growing up, my dad and I had kind of like one of those interesting relationships where he was a business executive, and so when I was little, on the kitchen counter would be like the Wall Street Journal. I'm like 10, like articles circled. And so I've always kind of enjoyed and had that business mindset. So I always knew I wanted to be a business major, but I wasn't sure what specifically, like what company or what area. But as I went through school, I realized like math was more of my strong suit. I was a little bit conflicted. I'm like, I either want to do MBA or law school, but I eventually just decided numbers were more my thing than words. So, and then I went to school, like I said, in Northern Maryland. So our career center obviously had internships and job opportunities like in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area. So Northrop Grumman is a defense contractor, and they're headquartered in Baltimore. And my dad is former military. He was a Marine. And growing up, he would sing the Marine Corps hymn every night. And just, it was just something special that I had a lot of respect for. So I actually set my sights on working at Northrop Grumman. And I just wanted to work in the defense industry. It seemed really exciting and interesting, and, you know, supporting that kind of R&D for, you know, national defense just seemed like a really cool thing to do. So I have a kind of a funny story. I was a junior, and there was a summer internship. So the summer between my junior and senior year. And I never had an interview before. And I was like, how hard could this be? You know, like, and I think it was a phone interview. Yeah, it was a phone interview, but I actually went to the Career Center to take it in one of their conference rooms. And I completely botched it. Like, I just didn't know how to answer. I got nervous and kind of would start answering a question. And I'm like, where am I going with this? It just wasn't good. And I didn't get the internship. So I ended up, was like, this will never happen to me again. So I ended up spending a lot of time in the Career Center, would do mock interviews. The lady, I think her name was Sabira, she became like my best friend there. And so she would video me and we would practice interview skills. And so I ultimately decided, like I said, to stay for my MBA. So I didn't need a job directly out of school. But everything I did was focused on getting a job at Northrop Grumman. And when it came time for interviews again, this was in the fall of my grad school year. They were hiring for the spring. I was so ready. And the interviewer was the same woman that interviewed me on the phone. But it was an in-person interview. I remembered her name. I don't know that she immediately remembered mine, but it was like seared in my memory. And I actually brought it up. And I brought up how I was just so ill prepared, and like everything that I had done since then, I was ready for this. And you know, I was interested in international business, for example, and they had a branch. And actually at that time, she was the manager for the international business area. So I ended up getting hired, and she actually brought me, I think, a couple rotations in onto her team. And I ended up working for her for about a year.
That's awesome.
So yeah, that was a long story, but it was just like a really kind of like a turning point for me anyway, in terms of planning and preparing and working for what you want.
Right. And I think that's a well taken point of, just because it didn't go well the first time doesn't mean you have to change your goal line. You know, you just need to go back and practice a little maybe.
Yeah. And I think she was kind of like, at first, like, oh, wow, you're going to tell me this story. And then she was like, yeah, well, it was like kind of a resilience and perseverance type story that she brought up, you know, years later, that kind of made her remember me.
That's awesome. So you got to Northrop after all that time and effort, and what was your day-to-day job like? What did you do?
So I started in a program called the Professional Development Program, which was one of the reasons I wanted to work there so badly, because it was such a well done incoming, you know, new out of school, new into the workforce type program. And it was a rotational program where I think it was every 6 months you go to a different area of the business. Yeah. So there were business employees, and then there were engineering employees. So the business handled all the business side of things. And then the engineers obviously were the ones actually making and developing all of the, whatever sector you were in, all of the machinery and equipment. So I got to rotate through international business, contracts, SAP, so like the CRM, and what was the other one? Contracts. Oh, financial planning. And that was the one that I wanted to do. I really wanted to do finance. So I finally got, and those were like the coveted rotations, because once you did a rotation there, you were more likely to end up in a permanent position in that area. So I did all 4 of those. I was able to see through doing contracts, number one, the importance of contracts, and number 2, I was more the numbers than the words person. I'm like, oh, good, I made the right decision.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot about reading contracts and understanding them, and it was huge for me. But the project finance, project management. So I worked with the program managers, but basically was like the CFO for a number of projects. And yeah, and then I ended up rotating full time into the finance role, and I did that for 5 years on a number of different projects.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you're in this defense contractor position in Maryland. The family's all in Kentucky at this point, right? What changed? What shifted you out of the sort of defense world? What did you do next?
So one quick but important story is like I said, there was a lot of professional development that went on at Northrop Grumman. There were a lot of opportunities for mentorship and learning from executives if you wanted to take advantage of it. And there was one program, and it was called Connect 1NG. So connecting, but a little play on that. And one of the things they did was, I think it was like once a month, they would do a roundtable luncheon with a different vice president of all areas. Like you didn't have to be in engineering to go to one of the engineering VP roundtables. So my friend that I started my first day with, she was in charge of like she would send out the emails and book it with the different VPs. So I always knew when she was going to send out the email, and I was ready to, because they only had 10 seats. So I would always email and I would get the seat. And so I just started learning about the business areas and meeting the vice presidents and just seeing, because I was like, I'm a big picture person. So I'm like, okay, I'm working here, but like, where do I want to be in the company in 10, 15, 20 years? So one particular vice president, his name was John Johnson. He was the vice president of an engineering sector. And for whatever reason, that discussion, that luncheon, I want to say I clicked with him. Well, he wasn't talking to me, but it really resonated with me. I just really I respected him very much. He had an interesting story. And he said, if anybody ever wants to talk or connect, my days are very busy, but I'm always here at 6 a.m. drinking coffee. You can come up, make an appointment and come up at 6 a.m. And so I did that. And I was one of two. And I would regularly schedule these coffees. And we would just talk about the things I was interested in or different areas. And then he would send out emails and introduce me to, hey, I think you should meet this person. You should meet this person. And I would go for like 20 minutes and sit and meet with them and then report back what I learned or what happened. And it allowed me to, within those 5 years, I probably met him maybe 2 years in. So like about 3 years, just see the whole company from like the top level. And it made me realize that that wasn't where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
It's either you're an engineer or you're military was what I learned. Most of the executives needed kind of a combination of, they needed to be engineers with business sense.
Yeah.
And I was a business person and I knew enough about the engineering to be dangerous, but not enough to quite get to the next level. I think I could have, but I just was like, I don't think this is the place. I loved it, but it was kind of like, all right, I think, and I started getting that feeling, but I was like, I think I need another year just to really like soak in everything I can, because they had so many great resources and so much to learn. So he ended up they have to mandatorily retire at 65, which was like devastating for him because he loved working there so much. He retired. I started getting that feeling like it's probably time for me to go find somewhere else. And I didn't know where to go because I grew up in Texas. My family was in Kentucky. I'm like, I'm not going to move what would I do in Kentucky? Like, what am I going to do there? And it was kind of weird because I'm like, I don't really want to go back to Texas because I loved it, but everyone's moved on, we're adults now. It's never going to be the same. So I kind of felt like I didn't know where I belonged, honestly. And I loved Baltimore, but it wasn't my forever spot. I just knew that. But somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn from Deloitte Consulting in DC. And I had always had an interest in living in DC. I just was like, I don't want to leave this area until I experience that. And then it happened. And he reached out. I had a security clearance from working at Northrop. That position that he reached out needed a security clearance. So I think, and it was a project finance role working with their federal group. So I was kind of like a perfect, my security clearance was paid for. They didn't have to deal with that. I had a project finance background. So it's kind of a shoe-in. Although I had Googled about Deloitte interviews and knew that they were like supposed to be super tough. And there were a lot of behavioral type questions, just the way that they ran their interviews. So I prepared, I was so ready, and I got hired. So I moved to DC, Northern Virginia, and I worked there for a year and a half. And it was a great firm, so professional, the most amazing onboarding that you could ever imagine, the training. And something that I love about business is it's very similar to life. It just is. It's about relationships. It's about honesty. It's about, just you have to know the content and what you're doing. But really after that, it's about trust and working hard and all the things that build a successful life. So I really enjoyed their training and their business culture. But I still worked with it. The government was my client. It was my client when I worked at Northrop because we were a government contractor. And then we were consultants for government, federal arms. And again, I started getting that itch like a year in, like, okay, I think I get it and I liked it, but I'm not going to buy a house in DC. It's expensive here. The whole thing just didn't feel right. So I decided to transfer from the Deloitte office in DC to the Deloitte office in Dallas. I'm like, at least if I get to the location I need to be and I have a job, then I can figure out what I want to do with my life. So it was November, and I thought, okay, well, I'll start in January. I'll go work remote from Kentucky with my family for the holidays, and then I'll head to Dallas in January, figure it out from there. I was in the middle of working on a huge project with Deloitte, and they couldn't risk losing me, and I knew that. So I was like, I'll stay on and work remote for you. So it allowed me to I had my income, I had everything. They didn't love back then. I mean, you could work remotely because we were consultants, but it wasn't ideal to not be at the office sometime. But I was able to negotiate that. So I went to Kentucky, was working there. Something we kind of skipped over, the reason that my family moved to Kentucky was my dad took a job as the vice president general manager at Buffalo Trace. So he worked there for 6 years. I interned there all through college. I didn't have any friends here. I didn't have anything to do. So in the summers and holidays, I just spent my time. I would just go into work with him when he would go in, and I would everything under the sun I did there. It was just kind of like, they didn't have an official internship program. I just was like, I'm gonna help out wherever I can. Yeah. And so I did that for a number of years. He left after 6 years, and it was right when the craft distilling industry had started. So he was helping write business plans for craft distillers, helping them source bulk whiskey, helping educate banks so that banks could loan to these craft distillers, things like that. So again, as I said, we've had a close business relationship. So I worked with him at Buffalo Trace. When he became a consultant, he was used to having people helping him with PowerPoints and Excel sheets. Well, guess what? It was me. While I had my full-time job, I was doing that. So when I came home, he was working his consulting from the kitchen table, and I was working my Deloitte dashboards from the kitchen table, and he needed help on something. And I was like, oh, okay, I think he probably needs a ton of help. I know how to do it. He had just started his first M&A project with a distillery and a large spirits company. And I was like, shoot, I never in a million years thought, A, I would live in Kentucky, and B, that I would work with my dad. Neither one of those things were really on my list of things to do, but it just made sense. So I never moved to Dallas. I finished out working remote on this project actually through March with my team in DC. During that time, I was able to use up my vacation time and volunteer at craft spirits tasting events, like just volunteered at a lot of things because I still had my income. I had no overhead because I was living at home. And it allowed me to start to kind of get my feet under me. And when I left Deloitte, I joined my dad, Wolfe Consulting, and I ended up living in their basement. That was challenging as a 30-year-old, 29-year-old. And I worked with my dad for 2 years on anything and everything, and basically was like, everything from like a secretary to booking travel, to doing all of the spreadsheets and financial models, to sell a distillery, to buy a distillery, to sell bulk whiskey, and doing that administrative work and the behind the scenes work. That's everything. I mean, you're doing it. And it was good. It was challenging, but it was good. And I learned a lot. I was able to volunteer a lot, and he paid me a little. I made like a third of what I made at Deloitte.
Yeah.
My first year I always look at my tax returns and I'm like, wow, that's quite the story. I started from the bottom. But I kind of just knew, I'm like, the money's going to come. Like, I'm not worried about money. I know that once I become like a subject matter expert in this area, I'll be valuable enough. I'll have something to offer and I can make the money work. So I worked with him for 2, maybe 3 years, started getting like, I think I kind of want credit for the work that I'm doing. And not that he didn't give me credit, but they were his clients. So I was doing the work for him. It was his name on it, his company on it. It was just like, at some point I need to not be at the kitchen table if I want to life. And he just didn't really want to grow the company. He liked his life. He'd worked so hard. He grew up very poor in New Orleans. He'd worked his whole life, just killing himself doing it. And so he just kind of liked that casual, take the business when it comes, and no pipeline and no big plan. And it worked for him, but it wasn't going to work for me. So I met Ashley Barnes, who's now my business partner, on a tour with a group, coincidentally. Recognized and knew I had been looking at the different areas of the industry where my expertise could be utilized, as well as just other areas that needed help. And quality control was just, after working the judging events, seeing, what the products were that were out there all across the US, and just knowing that the distilleries in Kentucky had generations of distilling knowledge, but all those people worked at the distilleries that were here in Kentucky. Now, there are over 2,000 craft distilleries here in the US. We don't have 2,000 trained master distillers, but someone needs to be distilling, somebody needs to be blending, and there's just not enough knowledge. It's such a young industry. 10 years is not enough time to get people up to speed. So I just thought Ashley would be such an asset to this business, to this industry. A part of what we did, my dad and I, was to sell and broker bulk whiskey. And I always wondered, I'm like, what are they going to do after we sold it to them? Like, well, what are they going to do with it? Where does it go? How does it become their own? How do they make it unique to them? It just always kind of bothered me. And so if Ashley was with me, she could apply those skills and help those distilleries, whether they were distilling their own or if they had bought it, either way. So when I met her, of course, I was like, oh, she would never want to work with, I don't know. I just thought, oh, she's super cool. She's so smart and interesting. And I was like, she would be a great judge for these craft whiskey judging events. So I submitted her name. She accepted. befriended her. I befriended her that weekend. One of the nights she mentioned that she was up for a promotion, and if she didn't get it, she would be looking elsewhere. And I thought, oh, okay. That's a good bit of information. So that judging was in January. The promotion was would have been in April, and we didn't talk those months. I just was like, if she wants it, she'll reach out. So she reached out in May and was like, I didn't get that job promotion. I have an offer from a craft distillery. I know you know craft distilleries. What do you think about this one? And do you think this would be a good move? And it wasn't. It would have been a step down for sure. And so I said, don't do it. You know, let me think about clients we have. Maybe they could utilize you, or one of them could hire you. And then I realized no one can afford her. She really, you know, craft distillers are tight on cash because it's a capital intensive business, very expensive equipment. And then you're putting away whiskey, but you're not recognizing the revenue until years later when it's ready to bottle and sell. So the cash to cash cycle is off. So they're really tight on cash always. And for what Ashley deserved to be making, they couldn't probably afford her, but I also didn't want to pigeonhole her with one. I just thought she's too good. So I suggested to my dad, well, could she join us? And it was nothing about her or against her, but he just didn't want the responsibility of an employee. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start my own company then. And I was already wanting to anyway. So I started the Spirits Group, and she and I kind of came up with our master plan. We're like, how are we going to do this? We don't have any money. We don't have any, clients. Also, like a month after we decided to do this, she called me and was like, we're pregnant. She and her husband didn't think they could actually have kids, and she was pregnant. So we're like, oh, shoot. What are we going to do? It was like one thing after another. I'm living in my parents' basement. She's pregnant. We don't have any money. We're like, what do we do? But we're like, we're going to make this work. We wanted to be, working with people that valued us as women. And we're like, okay, well, we're not just going to have her get pregnant and then be like, oh, I guess we can't do it. Like, that didn't seem like to match with the values that we were trying to instill in our company. So we're like, okay, let's figure this out. So there was actually a moonlighting clause in her Four Roses contract that I found. So we worked on the weekends and in the evenings. There was another blender in the industry who I was friends with and I had met through just all my networking over the past couple of years. I knew she was super busy, so I called her and I said, hey, would you mind, if you have any extra clients, could you send them to us? Because we couldn't market or anything. She was still at Four Roses. So she referred us our first 2 or 3 clients. We were working on that kind of quietly. And then Ashley was able to keep her health insurance, have her son. And it really took about a year anyway to build up enough business that she could support her family and that I could be making enough to really feel good about her leaving her job. So it was November. It was actually this week in 2017 that she left Four Roses and we announced the Spirits Group. So we're coming up on our 3-year anniversary. And it's been awesome. We have a really solid consulting business. We have about 50% of our clients are craft distilleries, 50% are NDPs, non-distilling producers. So they source and have a brand. And we've had adventures, we've traveled internationally, we've had times where we had no money, we had times where we had a lot of money, and it's awesome. And I handle all of the financial, strategic kind of relationships with our clients, but then also I do all the financials for our company as well. And she does everything from distillate analysis, match rate analysis, warehouse profiling, and kind of like pipeline innovation for our clients. And we have a third person who, his name is Heath Towery. He's a distillery engineer, and he does any of our clients that have physical facilities already or want to build them. He designs, builds, process flow, increasing efficiency. So if you add a piece of equipment or adjust this piece of equipment, it's going to help with increased capacity. Oops. And so he's awesome. We love working with him. And so we got a little team, but we really kind of within all of our skill sets can cover everything except for we don't do compliance and regulatory because that's a very important and you need to kind of be an expert in that area. Alcohol is heavily regulated, as you can imagine. So we don't do that. And we really don't do branding and marketing. Like we can help kind of point in the right direction, but we're not designers or marketers. So, but everything else we pretty much handle.
Well, I think it's an incredible story, and you guys have certainly already in 3 years made quite a name for yourself and have some successful brands out there that you're working with. And, I don't know what all the NDAs look like, but for the students, the ones who are 21, what are things that they might see on a shelf that you guys have helped with?
Yeah, so there are a number of clients that we don't either disclose that we work with or they're not on the shelf yet. So for the ones that are on the shelf, there's a brand called Lucky 7. They're distributed in California, Illinois, Tennessee, Kentucky, and they're expanding. And they are ones that we started with when they had the idea. And we can only have so many of those because it's a lot of work, obviously, to start from scratch that way. So the people that we qualifying a client, that's what I do. I do a lot of vetting. Everybody has an idea. Everybody wants to start a whiskey brand. Everybody wants to start a distillery. But that was something so valuable that I learned over the years working with my dad, because he would just get all these emails just inundated. And it's like, okay, well, there are only so many hours in the day. There are only one or two of us. How are we going to pick who we're going to work with? So I do that regularly, every day, at least once a week, we have somebody that reaches out, I would say, with a new idea or brand concept. But these guys, there was just something about them. So because I know what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and I just you recognize it in other people, if that makes sense. So you got to be a little gritty, you got to be scrappy, you got to be hardworking. There are just qualities in a person that I can identify immediately. And you have to have perseverance, really, because it's a long process. Nothing goes perfectly. I can't just sketch it out. There's not a plug and play for this because everybody has a different idea, different markets they want to sell in, different budgets, different personalities. So these two guys from Lucky 7, they were awesome. I was like, they're going to do this. They're doing it. We can get on with them, or, their train's leaving the station. And sure enough, they respect us. They listen. They make it happen. If we have juice that we think would be perfect for their brand, they find the money. They trust us, and it's working. And so they've got 3 SKUs now. They've got a 12-year, a 6-year, 12-year Kentucky bourbon, 6-year Kentucky bourbon, and a 4-year double oaked. So that was kind of like an innovative project that Ashley did for them, where we had some liquid available and it needed a little extra time. So she suggested that they purchase barrels with a heavy toast in the inside. So toasting instead of charring allows for like the vanillins and other sweeter notes in the wood to come close to the surface. And you can do it takes less time to add sweetness and really nice notes to the bourbon. And it's called the Holiday Toast, actually. And it just hit the shelves like a month or two ago, in time for the holidays. So they're awesome. The products are great. The packaging's great. They're cool. And so there's been, podcasts and different things on them. And then another client of ours is Penelope. So again, two men. They are awesome. They've probably done one of the best jobs that I've seen with digital and social media marketing. So with COVID this year, it's just been even more important than ever to somehow correctly get the marketing, the packaging, the digital and social media marketing all to work together to translate into case sales. Because it's cool if it's all over social media, but if it's not on the shelf
Right.
where you're marketing it, if people can't get it, well, that's kind of useless too. So they've just done a great job, and they launched, I think, in like January of this year.
Oh,
So
wow.
they launched during COVID, and like just doing amazing.
That's awesome.
And another client of ours, so those two are NDPs. They don't have a distillery, they're just a brand. We have, I would say, two distillery clients in Nashville who we just love and we've been working with for a while. One is called Pennington Distillery. They have a brand called Davidson's Reserve. And so Ashley does everything with them, from like helping the distiller when they actually are distilling to they have 4+ year old aged whiskey and they never source. So they had a vodka brand that they marketed and did so well, like 50,000 plus cases just in the Nashville area.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the thing that allowed them to have the cash flow to be patient with their whiskey. So they waited 4 years. I think they actually have a 5-year out now. But she does all the blending for them. Awesome. And then another one is Leaper's Fork. They're awesome. They're very small, kind of like boutique. So they don't have volume, but they're quality, and they're like the nicest people on earth. And the cool thing is most people that are in the whiskey business are passionate, they're excited, they're hardworking. So like there are a lot of really cool people. There are some not so cool people. So but overall, like there's just, there's a really good vibe and good energy about this business and this industry that I love. And we've curated carefully our clients so that as of right now, we have a really solid book of business with people that it's like, would we want to sit down and have a beer with them? It's kind of like, that's a good test. So we're just really lucky right now to have all of that.
Well, I think that's such an important point for the students is, this is work and life are not separate ends of the teeter-totter. Work and life are the same thing, and figuring out how to make your work a good part of your life. It's not always the case that you can be so selective, and we all have had jobs that were just jobs because you need a job, and that happens too. But as we think about how to spend our time and how to build businesses, making sure that it's something that's additive to your life overall, as opposed to something that's sort of, drudgery that has to be done in order to go live your life, is something that I hope the students will, take away. We've spent a fair amount of time talking about personality and team building and being considerate of those things. So I think you've reinforced a lot of what we talk about in class, and I really appreciate the time today. We'll keep in touch, and for the students, Monica and I are working together on a project. So if you have questions, feel free to shoot them over to me, and I will take them back to her to answer. So
yeah, definitely. And the Spirits group, we're on Instagram. So if you want to follow along, got some, we post and have our journey that we try to share. So, and then our website, thespiritsgroup.com, for kind of some of our bios and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Thanks for reminding me of that. Yeah, no, I think they'll, when you start seeing a whole bunch of new followers on your next social media report from Arkansas and Texas,
I'll know who it is.
They came from. All right. Thanks a lot, Monica.
Thank you so much.